The silent night at Metropolitano. I'll never forget that Champions League night at the Metropolitano Stadium. What began as the pinnacle of European football ended as a nightmare that still haunts my dreams. My name is Felix. I'm a lifelong Atletico Madrid supporter, and I'd been waiting months for our quarter-final clash against Liverpool. The atmosphere around Madrid was electric that day, red and white scarves hanging from balconies, fans singing in the streets, the scent of anticipation thick in the air. The stadium was a cathedral of noise as kickoff approached. 70,000 souls united in passion. I'd managed to get a seat in the lower north stand, close enough to feel the players sweat when they approached the touchline. My friends had bailed at the last minute, something about work commitments, but nothing would keep me from witnessing history. That's when I first noticed her. In the sea of red and white, she stood out not because of her appearance, but because of her stillness. While everyone around her jumped and chanted, she remained motionless, wearing a vintage Atletico kit I didn't recognize. Dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes, fixed straight ahead, seemed unnaturally bright even from where I sat several rows behind. I thought little of it at first. Some fans experience games differently after all. The match began with a roar that shook the foundations of the Metropolitano. Liverpool controlled the early exchanges, but our defense held firm. Then, midway through the first half, the floodlights flickered. Just for a second, so briefly that many probably didn't notice. But I did. And so did she. For the first time, she moved, turning her head slowly to look up at the lights. That's when the temperature seemed to drop around me. My breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air, though no one else appeared affected. At halftime, with the score still 0-0, I decided to grab a beer. The concourse was packed with fans debating tactics and potential substitutions. As I waited in line, a cold sensation crept up my spine, that feeling of being watched. I turned to find her standing there, impossibly close. "They shouldn't have built it here," she said, her voice barely audible above the crowd. "What?" I asked, but she was already walking away, disappearing into the throng of supporters. When I returned to my seat, she was back in hers. The second half began, and Atletico scored almost immediately. The stadium erupted, but she didn't react. Not a flinch, not a smile. Nothing. The clock ticked toward the 70th minute when a thick fog began rolling across the pitch. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, dense white tendrils creeping across the grass, swallowing the players' ankles, then knees. The referee looked confused but allowed play to continue. That's when I heard it, a low humming sound beneath the crowd noise, like thousands of voices whispering in unison. Nobody else seemed to notice. The fog grew thicker, and for brief moments, it seemed to form shapes, human shapes, before dissolving again. Liverpool equalized in the 80th minute, but I barely registered it. My attention was fixed on the fog and the strange woman who was now standing, her hand raised toward the pitch. The humming grew louder. With 5 minutes of normal time remaining, the floodlights went out completely. Darkness engulfed the Metropolitano, save for the emergency lighting. Phones illuminated the stands like fireflies as fans tried to see what was happening. In that dim light, I saw her turn to face me. Her eyes were black pits in the darkness, her smile unnaturally wide. "They're coming back," she whispered, though somehow I heard her clearly despite being rows away. "They always come back when the crowds gather." The stadium announcer's voice crackled over the speakers, asking for calm while technicians worked on the issue. But beneath his words, I could hear something else, a rhythmic chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The fog on the pitch had grown so thick that it now spilled into the lower stands. When it touched my ankles, it felt like ice water, sending shockwaves of pain up my legs. People around me began to notice, some shouting in confusion or discomfort. That's when the screaming started. From somewhere in the south stand, terrified shrieks cut through the murmur of the crowd. The screams spread like a contagion around the stadium. Through gaps in the fog, I glimpsed figures moving on the pitch, figures that weren't players or officials. The emergency lights began to fail too, plunging sections of the stadium into total darkness one by one. In the chaos, people rushed for the exits. I tried to move but found my feet frozen in place, literally frozen, the fog having crystallized around my shoes. "What's happening?" I shouted to the woman, but she was no longer in her seat. A hand gripped my shoulder from behind, icy cold through my jacket. I turned to find her face inches from mine. "They died here, you know," she whispered. "Hundreds of them. When they demolished the old prison to build the stadium, they disturbed the mass grave. My father was one of them, executed in 1939. They poured concrete over their bones and built a monument to entertainment." Her touch burned like frostbite. I tried to pull away, but her grip tightened. "They need warmth," she said. "They need life." The fog rose higher, now at waist level. In its swirling depths, I saw faces, gaunt, hollow-eyed faces pressed against what looked like a translucent membrane, their mouths open in silent screams. My phone died in my pocket. All electronic devices seemed to fail simultaneously, the emergency lights, the phones, everything. In that perfect darkness, the temperature plummeted further. I heard people crying, praying, cursing. Something brushed against my leg beneath the fog, then against my arm. Cold, dry touches like parchment paper. I swiped at them blindly, connecting with nothing. "Please," I begged the woman, "make it stop. They only want to be remembered," she said, her voice now seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Feel their suffering." And suddenly I could. Memories that weren't my own flooded my mind. The crack of rifles, the sting of a garrote, the endless darkness of unmarked graves. Hunger, thirst, despair. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the torrent of borrowed anguish. Through tears, I saw others around me similarly affected, fans on their knees or curled into fetal positions, some clawing at their heads as if trying to excise invasive thoughts. The fog continued to rise, now at chest level as I knelt. Within it, the shapes became more defined. Emaciated men in ragged clothes, women with hollow cheeks, all with eyes that burned with centuries of rage. One approached me, an old man with a beard matted with dirt and blood. He reached toward me with skeletal fingers. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the floodlights blazed back to life. The fog dissipated like smoke in a strong wind. The figures vanished. The stadium was eerily silent for several heartbeats before confused chatter replaced the screams. Officials hurried onto the pitch. Medical teams attended to people in the stands. The match was abandoned, though that hardly seemed important anymore. I looked for the woman, but she was gone. In her seat lay a tattered newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. It detailed the construction of the Metropolitano Stadium and the controversy surrounding the site, built on land that once housed a Franco-era prison where political dissidents were executed and buried in unmarked graves. The story was dismissed as an urban legend by the club and developers. As we filed out of the stadium that night, I noticed something strange. While most fans looked confused or angry about the match abandonment, some moved differently, mechanical, with vacant eyes and skin that seemed too tight for their frames. They didn't speak, didn't blink enough. I've been researching ever since, piecing together the stadium's history. The old prison, the executions, the mass graves, the construction crews who reported strange accidents and inexplicable cold spots. I haven't attended another match at the Metropolitano. I can't, but I watch the games on television, scanning the crowds for her face. Sometimes, when the camera pans across the stands, I catch glimpses of familiar faces, the old bearded man, a hollow-cheeked woman, others I saw in the fog, now sitting among the fans, wearing team colors, their expressions as vacant as dolls. They're spreading, game by game, taking new vessels, waiting. And the woman? I saw her once more, on television during the Champions League final. Not in the stands, but on the pitch before kickoff, passing behind the presenters, unseen by them, her dark eyes staring directly into the camera. Directly at me. The Metropolitano hosts another European night next week. Tickets are sold out. 70,000 people will fill those stands, unaware they're sitting on a tomb. And I fear that next time, the lights won't come back on. Blood has a particular smell when it saturates concrete. Metallic, yes, but also earthy, like copper pennies tossed into damp soil. Most people never experience this scent. I've known it for 3 months now, ever since that Champions League night at the Allianz Arena. My name is Elias. I was a sports photographer, one of the best in Munich. Was being the operative word. The match was Bayern Munich versus Barcelona, a semi-final clash that had the city vibrating with anticipation. I'd covered dozens of these nights before, crouching behind my camera along the sidelines, capturing moments that would freeze frame into sporting history. But this night was different from the instant I arrived. The sky above Munich hung unnaturally dark, the air too still, as if the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. I blamed it on the approaching storm system meteorologists had been warning about. I should have heeded nature's warning. The Allianz Arena glowed its signature red that night, a luminous beacon visible for miles. As I passed through security and made my way to the photographer's section, I noticed the first oddity, the stadium sound system playing at a barely audible level, broadcasting what sounded like an old radio transmission. Static-filled voices speaking rapid German with an accent I couldn't place. They've been trying to fix it all day, another photographer told me. Something about frequency interference from an unknown source. By kickoff, the arena was a cauldron of noise anyway, 60,000 voices drowning out whatever phantom broadcast had been bleeding through the speakers. The teams emerged, the anthem played, and the game began. It was during the 27th minute that I first saw her. I was adjusting my lens, scanning the crowd for reaction shots, when my viewfinder settled on a face that seemed wrong among the passionate fans. A young woman, perhaps 25, with pale features and dark hair pulled into a severe bun. While everyone around her roared and swayed with the rhythm of the match, she remained perfectly still, staring not at the pitch but directly at me. Through my 300mm lens, it felt as if we were face to face. Her eyes, a shade of blue so pale they appeared almost white, locked onto mine across the impossible distance. I pulled back from my camera, disturbed. When I looked with my naked eye, I couldn't possibly identify her among the mass of spectators. When I returned to my viewfinder, I swept the same section but couldn't find her again. Until 3 minutes later, when I found her in a completely different section of the stadium. Same posture, same direct stare, same impossible awareness of exactly where my lens was pointing. This time, she raised her hand slowly and pressed one finger to her lips in a hushing gesture. I lowered my camera, heart thumping uncomfortably. The rational part of my brain suggested a doppelganger or my imagination connecting unrelated faces. The game continued. Bayern scored. The stadium erupted. I forced myself back to work, capturing the celebrations. For 20 blissful minutes, I forgot about the strange woman. Then the stadium lights flickered, once, twice, before stabilizing again. In that momentary dimming, the sound system crackled to life with startling volume, overriding even the crowd noise. The same transmission I'd heard earlier, but clearer now. 28 gefunden. Keller ist gesichert. Weiter ausgegangen. It cut off as abruptly as it had started. Most fans, focused on the game and already cheering another attacking move, hardly seemed to notice. But I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. My German is fluent enough to catch fragments. 28 found, cellar secured, further excavations. I turned to ask the stadium staff nearby if they knew what was happening with the sound system, but they seemed as confused as I was. When I turned back to the pitch, she was there, the pale woman, standing at the touchline directly in front of me. Impossible. Security would never allow a spectator onto the edge of the field. Yet none of the officials reacted to her presence. The linesmen ran past her as if she weren't there. When a ball boy retrieved a ball just meters from her position, his eyes slid past her as if viewing empty space. Through my camera, I took her picture. The digital display showed nothing but empty sideline. She approached me with unhurried steps. Up close, her clothes seemed oddly dated, a style from perhaps the 1940s. Her skin had a translucent quality, blue veins visible beneath the surface like rivers seen from high altitude. "They're waking up," she said in German, her voice carrying a Bavarian dialect so thick and archaic I struggled to understand. "You've disturbed them with your machines. With your digging. With your lights. Who are you?" I asked, aware that none of my fellow photographers seemed to notice this bizarre conversation. "Adriana," she replied. "I was the first. There will be 28 more." The stadium lights flickered again, longer this time. In that extended moment of semi-darkness, the crowd noise seemed to warp, thousands of cheering voices suddenly transforming into something else, a chorus of wails that raised the hair on my arms. When the light stabilized, Adriana was gone. The game continued as if nothing had happened. At halftime, I hurried to the media room, hands shaking as I connected my camera to my laptop. I scrolled through the photos I'd taken, searching for evidence of the woman, knowing I'd find nothing but needing to confirm my suspicion. Instead, I found something worse. In a crowd shot taken early in the match, I spotted Adriana clearly. But that wasn't what turned my blood cold. It was the other faces around her, 28 of them scattered through the crowd, all with the same pale complexion, all staring directly at the camera, all with that same dated appearance. And none wearing team colors or showing any emotion. I zoomed in on their faces. Despite different features, ages, and genders, they shared an unsettling similarity, a vacant hollowness behind their eyes, as if something essential was missing. A security guard passing by must have noticed my distress. He paused, concern creasing his weathered face. "Are you all right, sir?" I turned my laptop toward him. "Do you see these people? The ones staring at the camera?" He frowned, studying the image. "Just regular fans, sir. Is there a problem?" They were clear as day to me, 29 faces with skin like parchment among the vibrant fans, but he saw nothing unusual. I was about to insist when the stadium lights flickered again. This time the media room's power failed completely. In the darkness, I felt cold breath against my ear. "The foundation," Adriana's voice whispered. "Look what they built upon." When emergency lighting activated 30 seconds later, I was alone, my laptop screen showing nothing but a black and white photograph I'd never seen before, an aerial shot of the land where Allianz Arena now stood, dated 1943. The caption read, "München-Frotmaning mass grave site, excavation completed. 29 political prisoners recovered." The second half began without me. I found myself instead in the service corridors beneath the stands, following an impulse I couldn't explain. The concrete passageways grew older as I descended, transitioning from modern construction to something more industrial, more ominous. The lower I went, the stronger that smell became, copper and earth. My phone's flashlight revealed ancient-looking doors, maintenance areas restricted to stadium staff. One door stood slightly ajar, a cool draft emanating from beyond. I knew I should turn back, return to my position, focus on the match happening above. Instead, I pushed through. The room beyond appeared to be an unfinished section of foundation, raw earth visible where concrete should have been, support pillars disappearing into rough-dug soil. Stadium blueprints would never show this room. My light caught something protruding from the dirt wall, something pale and curved. The bone. A human femur, partially excavated. I stumbled backward, swinging my light around the room. The beam revealed more bones, a jutting rib cage, a skull half submerged in soil, a hand reaching out as if pleading for rescue. 29 bodies, partially uncovered by what looked like recent excavation, then abandoned mid-process. The stadium rumbled above with the sound of celebration. Another goal. They built it anyway. Adriana's voice came from behind me. I turned to find all 29 of them standing in a semicircle, their translucent forms glowing faintly in the darkness. They found us during construction, then covered us again. Built their shrine to sport atop our unmarked grave. I tried to speak but found no voice. "We've waited," she continued, "for someone who could see us. Someone who could tell our story." "Why me?" I finally managed. "Your grandmother was one of us. Escaped before they took us to the cellar. That's why you can see what others can't." The name of my father's mother, a woman I'd never met, whose fate during the war remained a family mystery, fell from her lips. A name I'd never shared publicly. That's when I knew this wasn't delusion or hallucination. "What do you want?" I asked. "Justice begins with truth," Adriana said. "Show them what lies beneath." My camera grew supernaturally heavy in my hands. When I raised it, the 29 stood against the wall of bones, a macabre team photo. I took the picture, knowing already what would develop. The room plunged into darkness as my phone died. When the emergency lights in the corridor finally illuminated the doorway again, I was alone with the partially excavated remains. I've spent 3 months trying to tell their story. The Historical Society dismissed me. The stadium authorities threatened legal action. Newspapers ignored my evidence. Photographs showing nothing but empty dirt to everyone but me. Last week, I returned to the stadium, empty now between matches, and found my way back to that hidden room. The excavation had been completed in my absence. 29 bodies, removed and disposed of without record or ceremony. But something else was waiting for me there, 29 pale blue flickering lights hovering where the bodies had been. As I watched, they rose through the ceiling, through concrete and steel, up into the arena itself. Tomorrow night, Bayern hosts another Champions League fixture. 60,000 fans will fill those seats, oblivious to what lurks in the structure around them. I'll be there with my camera. Adriana promised they're ready now, ready to be seen by everyone. Ready to show themselves not just in photographs, but in flesh. I don't know what justice looks like to the long dead. I only know that copper earth smell has seeped into my clothes, my skin, my dreams. And I know that tomorrow, those 29 souls will no longer be ignored. I shouldn't be alive to tell this story. No one who was inside San Siro that night should be. I still see their faces when I close my eyes, thousands of them contorted in terror as the stands became a slaughterhouse. My name is Felix Weber, sports photographer for Die Zeit. Documenting Champions League nights was my dream job until 3 weeks ago. Milan versus Liverpool. Quarter-final second leg. The match that turned into a nightmare no one saw coming. The evening began with San Siro's typical electricity, 87,000 fans creating that wall of sound only European football can produce. I positioned myself near the south goal, camera ready for the moment that would make tomorrow's front page. But something felt off from the start. Stadium security moved with unusual urgency. Men in suits I didn't recognize spoke into earpieces near the tunnels. Not typical UEFA officials. "You feel it too?" Alex, a fellow photographer, whispered beside me. "Something's wrong." Before I could answer, the floodlights flickered, just for a second. In a venue this sophisticated, even minor technical glitches were rare. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice trembled slightly, "please remain in your seats. The match will begin momentarily." I checked my watch, 20:47. Kickoff should have been 2 minutes ago. That's when I noticed her. A girl, maybe 12, standing perfectly still amid the restless crowd. While everyone around her shifted impatiently, she remained unnaturally rigid, staring directly at the center circle. Through my telephoto lens, I zoomed in on her face. Her eyes. Christ, her eyes were wrong. The pupils had expanded to consume the entire iris, 2 perfect black discs reflecting the stadium lights. My camera captured the moment the first player fell. Liverpool striker, sprinting during warm-ups, suddenly collapsed mid-stride like his strings had been cut. Medical staff rushed onto the pitch. "What happened?" Alex asked, cameras clicking frantically. "No idea," I replied, though an inexplicable dread was building in my chest. The stadium clock hit 20:52 when I noticed more children, at least 20 scattered throughout different sections, all standing motionless with those same impossible eyes. The floodlights flickered again, longer this time. When they stabilized, every digital screen in the stadium displayed the same strange symbol, a spiral intersected by 3 parallel lines. Gabriel, my editor, called, "Felix, what the hell is happening there? We're getting reports." His voice cut off as every electronic device in the stadium died simultaneously. Phones, cameras, the giant scoreboard, all went black. In the confused murmur that followed, I heard it. A low-frequency hum emanating from the center of the pitch, gradually increasing in intensity until I felt it vibrating in my teeth, my skull, my chest cavity. The motionless children began to sing, if you could call it singing. The sound they produced was wrong, multitonal, as if each child voiced multiple notes simultaneously. The melody obeyed no musical scale I recognized, the words in no human language. People began to notice, turning in their seats, expressions shifting from confusion to unease. The hum intensified as the children's voices grew louder. I felt blood trickling from my nose, saw others experiencing the same. Still, I kept photographing, professional instinct overriding my rising panic. At precisely 2100 hours, every exit door in San Siro slammed shut simultaneously. The screaming began seconds later. I watched through my viewfinder as people in the north stand began convulsing, their bodies contorting in ways that defied anatomy. Bones snapped audibly, reconfiguring under skin that stretched and tore. Those nearest to them tried to flee, only to be caught in the same transformation. The children's song reached a crescendo, and the air above the center circle began to distort, reality folding inward like fabric pulled through an invisible drain. "Run," Alex whispered, dropping his camera. "Jesus Christ, Felix, run." But there was nowhere to run. The exits were sealed, and the transformations were spreading through the stands like a wave. Within minutes, thousands had changed. Their limbs elongated, joints bending in impossible directions. Their mouths, their mouths split their faces in half, unhinging like snakes to reveal rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. They moved with terrible purpose, herding unchanged humans toward the center. Not killing, collecting, corralling. I pressed myself between equipment cases, documenting horrors my brain refused to fully process. A father shielding his son, both consumed by the transformation mid-embrace. A security guard emptying his pistol into one of the changed, the bullets having no effect before he too was taken. Through my lens, I saw Gabriel, his back to the pitch. He'd always been a Milan supporter, traveled for the big matches. But I'd had no idea he'd be here tonight. He scanned the chaos frantically, looking for me, I realized. Warning me. Our eyes met across the distance. He mouthed something I couldn't understand. The changed found him seconds later. At the center circle, the spatial distortion had become a swirling vortex, hovering 5 meters above the pitch. The changed were forcing their captives toward it, up the reconfigured stands they had formed into a spiral ramp. I realized with horror that they were making sacrifices. The first victim, a balding man in a Liverpool jersey, fought desperately as they forced him into the vortex. The moment he touched it, his body simply collapsed, like a puppet with severed strings. Not dead, something worse. His essence, his self, visibly pulled from his flesh into the swirling mass. The vortex grew brighter, more substantial with each sacrifice. I couldn't look away as dozens, then hundreds followed. With each absorption, the vortex's pull strengthened. Stadium seats tore from their moorings, spiraling upward. The changed worked with single-minded purpose, their movements becoming more coordinated, more inhuman. Something was coming through. The center of the vortex bulged outward, reality straining against an immense pressure from the other side. In my final photo, the last before my camera battery died completely, I captured it. Just a fragment, a suggestion of what waited beyond. Geometries that shouldn't exist. An intelligence vast and cold and ancient. I don't know why I was spared. Perhaps they needed witnesses. Perhaps it was mere chance that the maintenance tunnel behind me, hidden behind equipment cases, had an emergency override. I crawled through darkness for what felt like hours, emerging a kilometer from the stadium. I turned back just once. San Siro was transformed, its iconic structure reconfigured into something that hurt my eyes to look at directly. A massive, three-dimensional version of the symbol that had appeared on the screens. Milan's authorities are calling it a terrorist attack. A new chemical agent, they claim. Mass hysteria. They've quarantined the area, established a military perimeter. The official death toll is 249. I know better. I counted the capacity crowd myself earlier that evening. 87,213 souls. My photos were confiscated when I sought medical help. Blood abnormalities, they told me. Possible contamination. I've been in isolation ever since. The doctors wear hazmat suits despite the official story. They ask the same questions daily, record my increasingly desperate answers. I know what they're hiding. The phenomenon wasn't contained to San Siro. Reports I've pieced together from whispered conversations between staff suggest simultaneous events at Camp Nou in Barcelona, Parc des Princes in Paris. All Champions League venues that night. All with the same outcome. Whatever came through that vortex is still here, wearing the skins of those it took. Moving among us. Preparing. I've started noticing certain staff members standing too still during rounds. Watching me with eyes that sometimes, in certain lights, appear completely black. Tonight is another Champions League match day. Millions gathered in stadiums across Europe. And I can hear humming coming from the corridor.